This presentation is titled The Heroic Exploits of the World's Greatest North Pole Explorers. My name is Chris Aves, and today we will be examining the careers and achievements of several North Pole explorers. In the 19th century, the Arctic, then still largely undiscovered, captured the imagination of the Western world. References were made in several well-known works. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, first published anonymously in 1818, has a very significant connection to the Arctic. In fact, the novel both begins and ends in the polar regions. Conan Doyle had a direct personal experience with the Arctic. In 1880, at the age of 20, he served as a ship's surgeon on a whaling vessel called the Hope during a 6-month voyage to the Arctic. We will be looking at 5 Arctic explorers from the late 19th to early 20th century. These adventurers, who we could consider the rock stars of the Arctic area, namely Fridtjof Nansen, Roald Amundsen, Frederick Cook, Robert Peary, and Matthew Henson. Fridtjof Nansen was a Norwegian polymath who achieved fame as an explorer, scientist, diplomat, and humanitarian, ultimately winning the Nobel Peace Prize in 1922. While he had a long and impactful career, he is perhaps best known for 2 groundbreaking polar expeditions, the first of which was the first documented crossing of the Greenland ice cap. Nansen's first Greenland expedition in 1888 was daring and unconventional for its time. Rather than attempting to cross from the more populated west coast, he decided to start from the uninhabited east coast. This was a deliberate choice to force his party to move forward, as retreat would be virtually impossible. Nansen led a team of 6, including 4 Norwegians and 2 Sami, indigenous people of northern Europe. They were dropped off by ship, so they had no choice but to ski west to civilization, only had provisions for the one-way journey. The map shows his planned route in red and the actual route taken in green. They aimed for the west coast at Godthaab, now Nuuk. After enduring weeks on the ice, they reached the highest point of their journey, some 8,920 feet, on September the 5th, and struck the west coast on September the 26th. Nansen's successful crossing of Greenland was a significant achievement, not only as a feat of endurance, but also for its scientific contributions. It provided valuable information about the interior of Greenland and helped to prove his theories about ice drifts, which he would later apply to his even more ambitious expedition to the North Pole on the ship Fram. This expedition solidified his reputation as an intrepid and innovative explorer and laid the groundwork for future polar endeavors. To execute this unique plan, Nansen commissioned a specially designed ship called the Fram, Norwegian for forward. Built by Colin Archer, the Fram was revolutionary. It had an unusually rounded hull designed to be lifted by the immense pressure of the ice rather than crushed by it. This innovative design was crucial to the expedition's survival. Nansen's North Pole expedition of 1893–96 was a groundbreaking and audacious attempt to reach the geographical North Pole by harnessing the natural drift of the Arctic ice pack. It was a highly influential expedition that significantly advanced scientific understanding of the Arctic Ocean. After about 18 months, by March 1895, it became clear that the Fram's drift would not take them directly to the North Pole. Nansen, accompanied by Hjalmar Johansen, decided to leave the ship and attempt to reach the pole on skis and with dog sleds. They pushed northward, achieving a new farthest north record of 86 degrees 13.6 minutes north. So why was Nansen so successful in his endeavors? Nansen carefully planned every detail, designed his own equipment, knew how to improvise off the land, used Inuit methods like the use of dog sledges, kayaks, and snow houses. He was very scientific, planned well, adaptable, and daring. Nansen's small ship, the Fram, was designed with a special reinforced hull She was fully equipped with scientific equipment and supplies for 5 years, had workshops, a smithy, and a windmill that helped produce electricity. Sea ice in the Arctic is a dynamic and constantly moving component of the Earth's climate system. Its drift plays a crucial role in shaping the Arctic environment and has far-reaching consequences for the planet as a whole. The Arctic Ocean has east to west drift in 2 gyres as shown. The Beaufort Gyre is a large clockwise rotating gyre located in the western part of the Arctic Ocean, primarily in the Canada Basin north of Alaska and Canada. It's a significant feature because it accumulates a large amount of fresh water, acting as a freshwater reservoir for the Arctic. The transpolar drift stream, while not a gyre in the classic sense of a rotating circulation, is a major, roughly linear current that transports sea ice and water across the Arctic Ocean from the Siberian coast towards the Fram Strait between Greenland and Svalbard. Sea ice moves and is in a constant state of motion and is faster than land ice. Nansen had this brilliant idea to use the natural drift pattern of the Arctic ice pack to explore the North Pole. He would sail a ship directly into the ice off Siberia, letting it be frozen into the ice and further let it drift with the ice across the top of the world. The ship would then penetrate the heart of the Arctic. In March 1895, Nansen and his companion Hjalmar Johansen left the ship and set out on foot. For 3 weeks they struggled north on foot over immense ridges of broken ice. Drifting ice quickly carried them south faster than they could go north. Provisions were running low, so they reluctantly headed for land, which turned out to be a 4-month journey. They survived by hunting seals. The pair finally reached Franz Josef Land in June 1896, some 16 months after leaving the ship. The crew of the Fram broke free of the ice in Spitsbergen, more than 1,000 miles from their starting point. This expedition was considered a triumphant success because they had gone farther north than anyone had before. He was appointed a professor of zoology at the University of Christiania, now Oslo, in 1897, and later a professor of oceanography in 1908. Reflecting his shifting interests. Following Norway's independence, he served as Norway's first ambassador to London from 1906 to 1908, further solidifying Norway's standing on the international stage. After World War I, Nansen devoted himself almost entirely to humanitarian efforts. In 1920, he headed the Norwegian delegation to the newly formed League of Nations. Robert Peary was an American explorer and officer in the United States Navy, most famously known for his expeditions to the Arctic in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He is widely credited with leading the first expedition to reach the geographic North Pole, a claim that has been subject to considerable debate and controversy. Born in Krasny, Pennsylvania, Peary was raised in Maine after his father's early death. He graduated from Bowdoin College with a degree in civil engineering in 1877 and later joined the U.S. Navy Civil Engineer Corps in 1881. Peary visited the Arctic for the first time in 1886, making an unsuccessful attempt to cross Greenland by dog sled. He was not interested in scientific discovery or mapping, he just wanted to be first. This modus operandi will return to haunt him for the rest of his days. Unconventional and innovative, and ran his expeditions like a military assignment. Most enthusiastic supporter was President Theodore Roosevelt. Robert Peary's 1886 expedition was his first venture into the Arctic and marked a pivotal moment that would shape the rest of his career. Peary intended to cross Greenland by dog sled. Peary asserted in 1886 that Greenland was an island and that the North Pole lay beyond Greenland. In subsequent expeditions, he proved conclusively that Greenland was an island and was one of the first Western explorers to study Inuit survival techniques, incorporating them into his expeditions. On this expedition, Peary also succeeded in reaching further inland and establishing a new northern limit 2 years before Nansen. On his 1898 to 1902 expedition, he set a new farthest north record by reaching Cape Morris Jesup, Greenland's northernmost point. He again pushed the farthest north record in 1906. Supply shortages forced his team to return prematurely. As with many early expeditions, managing and replenishing supplies in the harsh environment was a constant struggle. Robert Peary's 1891 to 1893 expedition to Greenland was a significant milestone in his Arctic career, marking his first long-term stay in the region and leading to crucial discoveries and the development of his innovative Peary system for polar travel. Peary chooses a crew among which are Dr. Frederick Cook, who served as the group's surgeon, his wife of 2 years, Josephine Peary. Peary's aide, Matthew Henson, proved to be so reliable that Peary never went on expeditionary work without him. Cook at 23 became a doctor. He was from an impoverished background. He also had an enormous ambition to go to the North Pole. Peary advertised for a doctor to accompany him on his expedition to Greenland in 1891, and Cook joined as the ship's physician. On the Greenland expedition, Cook became so adept at learning the Inuit ways that he was in effect the second in command by the time the mission had ended. Their relationship would end in great rivalry. Josephine Cecilia Peary was an American author and Arctic explorer, best known as the wife of Robert Peary. However, Josephine was a notable figure in her own right, earning the nickname First Lady of the Arctic. The press was divided between extolling her for being so brave and loyal to her husband and excoriating Peary for even suggesting taking her along to what they called an icy Sahara. Josephine accompanied her husband on several of his Arctic expeditions, defying societal norms for women at the time. She became the first woman to take part in an Arctic exploration in 1891. She played active roles including hunting, cooking, nursing, and managing supplies. She also learned from the Inuit people, including their language and how to make fur clothing. Josephine's loyalty to her husband remained strong despite challenges, including his long absences and his relationship with an Inuit woman. In 1893, while on an expedition to Greenland, she gave birth to their daughter Marie Atnigito Peary, less than 13 degrees from the North Pole. Marie became famous as the Snow Baby, the most northerly born white child. They later had a son, Robert E. Peary, Jr. Matthew Henson was Robert Peary's invaluable assistant and a crucial member of his Arctic expeditions for over 2 decades. Their working relationship began in 1887 when Peary hired Henson as his valet for an expedition to Nicaragua. Peary was impressed by Henson's skills and resourcefulness, and from then on, Henson accompanied Peary on 7 subsequent Arctic expeditions, including the one in 1909 that claimed to reach the North Pole. Henson was more than just an assistant. He became a highly skilled Arctic explorer in his own right. He was fluent in the Inuit language and had a deep understanding of Inuit culture and survival techniques, which he learned and adopted. He was adept at dog handling, sled building and maintenance, hunting and navigating the treacherous Arctic terrain. The second Peary expedition to northern Greenland, 1891 to 1893. Peary was granted a 2-year leave from the Navy. On June 6, 1891, the party left Brooklyn, New York, in the seal hunting ship SS Kite. Soon after their arrival in Melville Bay, Greenland, a significant incident occurred. The ship's iron tiller suddenly spun around and broke Peary's lower leg. Both bones snapped between the knee and ankle. Dr. Cook skillfully set Peary's bones and oversaw his recovery. Peary was unloaded with the rest of the supplies at a camp they called Red Cliff. A dwelling was built for his recuperation during the next 6 months. Wife Josephine stayed with him. Late in 1891, Peary goes farther north to find out whether Greenland was a much larger landmass extending to the North Pole. During this period, he discovered Peary Land and conclusively proved that Greenland was an island. In 1893, Peary once again set out over the ice cap, but bad weather destroyed vital food supplies. Faced with the most dangerous of hazards, namely starvation, he had to turn back rather than have a disastrous outcome. Peary artfully salvaged his reputation by transporting a huge meteorite to the Museum of Natural History in New York City. Peary was driven by a desire for fame and recognition. Bringing such massive and rare specimens to a major institution like the American Museum of Natural History in New York City was a guaranteed way to garner significant public attention and scientific prestige. The meteorite was a sensation and attracted enormous crowds. During the second Peary expedition, the rivalry between Peary and Cook begins. Cook requested permission to publish his own studies of the Inuit people. Peary refused, preferring to keep the limelight focused on himself. Cook promptly resigned, and this began their polar rivalry. 2 additional attempts were made by Peary and Henson in 1902 and 1906. That now meant that Peary had failed in 3 major expeditions to reach the pole by 1906. He felt that one of the reasons was because he started from 300 to 400 miles south, which was as far as ships could penetrate. With this in mind, Peary decided he would build a special ship that could take him directly to the shores of the Arctic Ocean. March of 1905, Peary christened his new ship SS Roosevelt in honor of the popular American president and his admirer. The Roosevelt was specifically designed and built for Arctic exploration, incorporating innovative features to withstand and navigate through heavy ice. It had a reinforced wooden hull, a powerful steam engine, and a design intended to allow it to rise up on the ice rather than be crushed. By August 1908, the Roosevelt arrived at the edge of the Arctic Ocean. Let's look at some of the accomplishments and techniques used by Peary and Henson during their explorations. Peary was one of the first Arctic explorers to study Inuit survival techniques. He built igloos during the expedition and dressed in practical furs in the native fashion. Peary also relied on the Inuit as hunters and dog drivers on his expeditions. He pioneered the system, which he called the Peary system, of using support teams and establishing supply caches for Arctic travel. More of a failing than an accomplishment, Peary made no attempt to do research or bring scientists on the expeditions. These are some instruments used by Peary to determine position based on calculations using a chronometer and a sextant. A chronometer for measuring longitude and a sextant for measuring latitude based on the sun's position. He also made use of sastrugi wind surface markings, which are generally elongated and aligned parallel to the prevailing wind direction. This alignment makes them useful indicators of wind patterns for navigation. Peary's most well-known and debilitating experience with frostbite occurred during his 1898-1902 expedition. During a grueling march to establish a camp at Fort Conger on Ellesmere Island, Peary's feet became severely frostbitten due to the extreme cold, with temperatures reportedly as low as minus 49 degrees Fahrenheit. The frostbite was so severe that when his boots and socks were removed, 8 of his toes literally snapped off. The expedition surgeon had to amputate the remaining deadened tissue. This permanent injury significantly impacted his mobility and caused him discomfort for the rest of his life, though he continued to pursue his goal of reaching the North Pole with remarkable determination. For his final assault on the pole, Peary and 23 men on July 6, 1908, aboard the SS Roosevelt under the command of Captain Robert Bartlett. They wintered near Cape Sheridan on Ellesmere Island, and from Ellesmere departed for the pole on March 1, 1909. On the final stage of the journey toward the North Pole, Peary told Captain Bartlett to stay behind. Peary set out onto the polar sea ice with 6 expedition members and 21 Eskimos, the best 140 dogs from his total of 246 dogs, with 19 sleds carrying loads of 450 to 500 pounds. He formed them into 6 teams, which created a trail and established igloo camps. They also carried out a system of one-way relays to move supplies forward. Injured and poorer performers were sent back to land, one team at a time along the way to 88 degrees north, while Peary saved his own energy for the final dash. By the time they trekked 88 north, Peary had the choice of the 4 most motivated Eskimos and the best 40 dogs and 5 sleds for the final leg. March 31, 1909, the Peary and Henson party reached 88 north, all of 139 miles from the North Pole. Robert Peary claimed to have reached the North Pole on April 6, 1909. It's important to note that his claim has been a subject of historical debate and controversy, with questions raised about the accuracy of his navigation and the distances he reported traveling in the final leg of his journey. However, for many years he was widely credited with this achievement, as published in Peary's book The North Pole in 1910. Quote, "The pole at last, the prize of 3 centuries, my dream and goal for 20 years. Mine at last, I cannot bring myself to realize it. It seems all so simple and commonplace." While Robert Peary was widely credited for many years with being the first to reach the North Pole in 1909, his claim has faced significant scrutiny and doubt from historians, navigators, and polar experts. Here are the main reasons why many now believe he likely did not reach the exact North Pole. Lack of independent verification. Peary's account is contradicted by companion Henson's account of many detours slowing the pace. National Geographic Society's role. His claim was initially certified by the National Geographic Society, a major sponsor of his expeditions, after a rather cursory examination of his records. This raised questions about the objectivity of the review. Sealed records. Peary's journals and records were largely kept private by the National Geographic Society and his family for many years, only becoming fully accessible to researchers much later, around the 1980s. Some modern experts believe that Peary, faced with personal failure, falsified the facts of his final 5 days for fame and glory. They point to his sledging speeds over that last period as improbable. In 1984, the National Geographic Society, a major sponsor of Peary's expeditions, commissioned the Arctic explorer Wally Herbert to write an assessment of Peary's original 1909 diary and astronomical observations. As Herbert researched the material, he came to believe that Peary must have falsified his records and concluded that he did not reach the pole. Frederick Cook claimed to have reached the North Pole on April 21, 1908, which would have been nearly a year before Robert Peary's claimed arrival. Cook wanted street creds. However, the consensus among historians and polar experts is that Cook's claim is highly questionable and largely discredited. Frederick Cook's 1908 North Pole expedition was primarily funded by John Bradley, a wealthy casino owner and big game hunter. September of 1909, Cook announced that he and 2 Inuit companions had reached the North Pole on April 21, 1908. Accounts from his 2 Inuit companions, Peary and Etukishuk were later reported to contradict Cook's narrative, suggesting they had not travelled as far north as he claimed and had not been out of sight of land for the distances he reported. He claimed that bad weather conditions and drifting ice had prohibited his southward return, and he and his companions were forced to winter over in an ice cave. Cook provided very little in the way of convincing verifiable navigational data or independent observations to support his claim. So who supposedly reached the North Pole first, Cook or Peary? September 1st, 1909, the New York American had printed its own front-page headline, "Cook finds North Pole brings the U.S. land and fame." September 7th, 1909, readers of the New York Times awakened to a stunning front-page headline, "Peary discovers the North Pole after 8 trials in 23 years." Just keep in your mind that today the consensus of scholars believe that neither actually reached the North Pole. Peary was stunned at the news that Cook had already returned from the North Pole. Peary was furious, accusing Cook of lying. In the investigations that followed, it was found that Peary was unable to verify his own claim. The Arctic Trust controversy. The bitter public feud between Cook and Peary became known as the Arctic Trust controversy. Peary and his powerful backers launched a concerted campaign to discredit Cook, which, while perhaps overly aggressive, did highlight the weaknesses in Cook's claims. Peary was finally given the credit of having been first to the North Pole after his reputation had been tarnished, was given the thanks of Congress by a special act of March 3, 1911, and promoted to the rank of Rear Admiral in the Navy Civil Engineer Corps. He retired the same day. However, he felt his reputation was tarnished and died an embittered man in 1920, aged 63. A few closing notes on Dr. Frederick Cook's dark side of ambition. Originally, when he made his claim, Cook received a gold medal from the Danish Geographical Society. Cook never produced detailed original navigational records to substantiate his claim to have reached the North Pole. The records were lost, so the Society eventually withdrew their support. Finally, in 1919, he was sentenced on charges of fraud for promoting startup oil companies in Fort Worth, Texas. He served 11 years in prison. Roald Amundsen visited Cook in prison several times. He believed that Cook has saved his and others' lives on the Belgica Antarctica mission. Cook was pardoned by President Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1940, shortly before Cook's death that August. Peary's faithful companion and fellow explorer Matthew Henson was eventually recognized as the co-discoverer of the North Pole. 1937, he became the first African American to be made a life member of the Explorers Club, reaching its highest level of membership. Henson was awarded the Peary Polar Expedition Medal in 1944, received at the White House by Presidents Truman and Eisenhower. He died in 1955. Peary and then later Henson were buried in Arlington Cemetery next to each other. Let's turn our attention now to the quest to discover and traverse the Northwest Passage. Let's look at another indomitable Norwegian exploration spirit, namely Roald Amundsen. He was a legendary polar explorer, renowned for a series of groundbreaking achievements in the early 20th century, a period often called the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. Born on July 16, 1872, in Borge, near Oslo, Norway, into a family of ship owners and sea captains. Despite his mother's wish for him to become a doctor, Amundsen was fascinated by polar exploration from a young age, inspired by accounts of Sir John Franklin's Arctic expeditions. He even slept with his windows open in the harsh Norwegian winters to toughen himself for the cold. After his mother's death when he was 21, he abandoned his medical studies to pursue a life at sea, diligently preparing himself for polar exploration. Roald Amundsen successfully traversed the Northwest Passage between 1903 and 1906. He was the first to accomplish this feat entirely by ship, using his small vessel, the Gjöa. Later, he traversed the Northeast Passage between 1918 and 1920 aboard his ship, the Maud. While his initial goal for this expedition was to freeze the Maud into the ice and drift across the Arctic Ocean to the North Pole, he was ultimately unsuccessful in that specific aim. However, he did become the second person in history to sail through the entire Northeast Passage following Adolf Erik Nordenskjöld, and the first to sail through both the Northwest and Northeast Passages. The arduous journey, which took 3 years, made him the first to successfully sail through the fabled sea route, connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans via the Arctic. During this expedition, he learned invaluable survival skills from the local Inuit people, including the effective use of furs and dog sleds, which would prove crucial in his later endeavors. While many explorers before him had sought a commercial sea route through the Canadian Arctic, Amundsen's primary objective wasn't solely commercial. He aimed to locate the North Magnetic Pole, which had been previously visited in 1831 by James Clark Ross, and to conduct continuous magnetic and meteorological observations. However, becoming the first to successfully navigate the entire Northwest Passage was also a significant personal ambition. Amundsen chose a small 45-ton former herring fishing vessel named the Gjöa. His rationale for a small ship was strategic. The Arctic waters are notoriously shallow and unpredictable, and a small ship like the Gjöa, with its shallow draft, could navigate these treacherous areas where larger vessels would run aground. A smaller crew of 6 men offered greater flexibility in a challenging environment where resupply was difficult. Amundsen largely self-financed the expedition through his inheritance, and the Gjöa was what he could afford. The Gjöa was outfitted with a small 13-horsepower single-screw paraffin, diesel, engine, one of the first in a Norwegian vessel, which provided crucial maneuverability in the ice. The expedition spent 2 winters, 1903 to 1904 and 1904 to 1905, at King William Island and Gjöa at Haven, Nunavut, Canada. Amundsen learned from the Netsilik Inuit people about Arctic survival skills. As did Peary and Cook, he learned to use sled dogs for transportation and to wear animal skins in lieu of heavy woolen parkas. The ship cleared the Canadian Arctic archipelago on 17th of August 1905. It had to stop for the winter before going on to Nome, Alaska. During this winter stop, Amundsen traveled overland a distance of 500 miles to Eagle City, Alaska, and back, which had a telegraph station to wire a success message. His team reached Nome in August 1906. The crew returned to Oslo in November 1906, after almost 3.5 years away from Norway. Originally planning for the North Pole, Amundsen secretly redirected his expedition to the South Pole after hearing that Robert Peary claimed to have reached the North Pole. In a famous race against British explorer Robert Falcon Scott, Amundsen, with meticulous planning and the expert use of dog sleds, reached the South Pole on December 14, 1911, a full 33 days before Scott's ill-fated expedition. His strategic approach, which emphasized efficiency and adapting to the polar environment, e.g. using dog teams over ponies, was key to his success and the safe return of his entire team. Amundsen then continued on after conquering the South Pole. He was successful in finding the Northeast Passage in 1918-20 on his polar ship Maud, first to cross the Arctic by air in 1926. With financier Lincoln Ellsworth and Italian aeronautical engineer Umberto Nobile, Amundsen flew the airship Norge from Spitsbergen to Alaska, making the first verified flight over the North Pole. This also made him the first person to reach both the North and South Poles. Amundsen continued his polar explorations and scientific research. In 1928, at the age of 55, he disappeared while on a rescue mission to find Umberto Nobile, whose airship had crashed in the Arctic. Amundsen's plane crashed into the Arctic Ocean, and his remains were never found. The prospect of adventure and a desire for glory had driven Nansen, Peary, Cook, and Amundsen onto empty stretches of ice for years at a time, and culminated in their pivotal roles in history. Thank you for watching, and we hope you enjoyed this presentation on the heroic exploits of the world's greatest North Pole explorers. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel by pressing the subscribe and like buttons below. We are planning to add many more presentations covering a wide variety of science, history, and other enriching subjects. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, please feel free to make them, and we will do our best to respond. Again, thanks for watching, and please do subscribe.